Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be around the globe, and welcome to the Global Membership Council webinar on addressing skill shortage. My name's Jeff Mitchell, and I will be the MC moderator for this panel session. Just for a bit of housekeeping before we start, the webinar is being recorded, and that will be made available through the Global Membership Council website after the event. We're going to have time at the end of the panel or the end of the sessions for questions, and we will there'll still be an opportunity to have further questions submitted after the event. By default, audience members are muted. If you have a question, please use the Q&A panel that should be visible on your screen. If you would like to be heard, please indicate that in your question. I will be monitoring that channel as we go through, and if we get the opportunity, we will unmute the person who has requested and allow you to ask your question through the Q&A panel. Ably assisting me from Washington, DC is Judy Zagreski, who's the Vice President of Global Services. And she's in the background and is Chief Slide Clicker and Moderator of the Moderator. My profession, I'm a building surveyor, I'm in private practice, and globally you'll see our terminologies differ. And as I've got speakers from around the globe this morning, you will find different terminologies may creep in, which is only natural because you're used to speaking in your own language. There's some typical titles, I suppose what you call it, shown on the screen at present, but what we're talking about here today is, no matter what you're called, we're talking about people who are involved in building safety and keeping buildings safe. We're all familiar with the problem the workforce is having in trying to fill spaces. We're an aging workforce. There's not enough younger people joining the industry to replace retirees. This problem is felt not only in the US, but in the building safety industry around the world. Now, today, we won't be spending a lot of time talking about the problem in any exhaustive detail, but it's important to look at a few of the underlying causes to help us identify what solutions are needed. Most of our time today will focus on what's been done to successfully address these problems in jurisdictions around the world, hopefully providing some new ideas for us to consider. And you can see on the screen the topics that we're going to run through. Just as some introduction to the speakers in the panel today, as I said, my name's Jeff Mitchell. I'm a private building surveyor based in Queensland, Australia. I've been doing this for 45 years. I'm past chair and currently an executive member of the Global Membership Council. I'm also a past national president of the Australian Institute of Building Surveyors. Joining me today from Australia is Jeremy Turner. Jeremy is an accredited member of the AIBS, the Australian Institute of Building Surveyors, and an engineering technologist with a Bachelor of Building from the University of South Australia and a graduate certificate in civil engineering from the University of Adelaide in South Australia. As the AIBS technical and policy manager, Jeremy supports technical building policy development and advocacy, supporting the AIBS in the pursuit of its vision for the building surveying profession, and in the organisation's role as an occupational association. Jeremy represents the building surveying professions on various national bodies, including the Australian Building Codes Board, Building Codes Committee, the Premises Standard Expert Advisory Group, the Industry Technical Infrastructure Forum, the Construction Product Alliance, and a variety of Standards Australia committees. Jeremy was recently appointed chair of the Building Codes Committee Industry Representatives Group. Also from Australia, but on the other side of the continent, is Angela Fanti. Angela is a registered level 1 building surveying practitioner with over 15 years industry experience, working with legislation, the building approval process, inspections and enforcement. She's also a building surveying representative on the Building Services Board, the Department of Mines, Industry Regulation Safety, and has spent years serving the Australian Institute of Building Surveyors in various voluntary roles and is currently the Western Australian Director for the AIBS. She's also a member of the AIBS National Accreditation Panel and the Women's Special Advisory Group. Joining us from Canada is Manjit Sohi. Manjit has over 25 years experience as a building official. He's the Chief Building Official and Manager of Permits and Inspections at various municipalities in British Columbia. Manjit received his Bachelor of Science degree from India and his certificate in Building Technology from the British Columbia Institute of Technology. Manjit is the past president of the Building Officials Association of British Columbia and president of the Alliance of Canadian Building Officials Association. Manjit holds the title of RBO, which is Registered Building Official, and CRBO, Canadian Registered Building Official. Manjit now runs his own consulting company, providing building approvals and building development services to builders, developers, unregulated jurisdictions, and to the First Nations community of British Columbia. From the UK, David Gibson joins us. David is a chartered building engineer, chartered building surveyor, and chartered environmentalist. He's experienced building control manager and principal consultant with a demonstrated history of working within the construction and property industries, both public and private sectors, with extensive expertise in the legislative, building regulatory and control functions, working in conjunction with building control bodies and development teams through design, construction, inspection, and certification to create safe, secure, and sustainable built environment. Our US panelists, we have Bonnie Muhagira, is a senior plans examiner and inspector for the city of Aspen, Colorado. Bonnie currently serves on the governing committee for the ICC's Emerging Leaders Membership Council and participated as a shadow in the board of directors of the ICC program in 2019. Next is Ron Lynn. Ron has a wealth of experience in building safety space, serving over 30 years with the Clark County Department of Building and Fire Prevention as the building and fire official and then director. Following his tenure at Clark County, Ron served as Director of Operations for the Nevada State Contractors Board. In 2018, he founded his own consultancy through which he is frequently retained by the ICC for education, product evaluation, and consulting both domestically and internationally. He's an expert witness and consultant on building safety matters for numerous hotels and casinos in Las Vegas, and is a frequent lecturer on a variety of building safety topics, including code administration, legal topics, finance and management, building codes, and performance standards and construction issues. He's a past president of the ICC Board of Directors and a current member of the governing committee of the ICC Global Membership Council. And our other speaker from the US is Maddie Dominici. Maddie is the director of the Safety 2.0 program for the Code Council. Safety 2.0 is the International Code Council's signature initiative to welcome a new generation of members and leaders to the building safety profession. Maddie joined the Code Council team in 2014 and has served in various capacities over the past 7 years. In her current role, she leads the Code Council's program targeting the next generation of building safety professionals, which includes a technical training program, military families program, and several other initiatives. So you'll see we have a great wealth of knowledge amongst the speakers. You've heard enough from me now. Let's now turn to our panel, and I will ask Manjit to take the lead, and we'll have a look at a bit of an oversight of what's contributed to the problems. Thank you, Manjit.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, good evening, good morning to all guests all over the place and the panels and the audience members. The oversight. So we have a representation from 4 or 5 countries, and as you seen earlier, there has been different names called, whether it's a building official, whether it's called a code official, building inspector, building surveyor, and so on and so forth. So it's a likelihood that the regulatory system is similarly called different things in a different area. So what I'm planning to do, what I'm going to say a few things about how Canadian system works. In Canada, there is a national building code, and a national building code is developed by NRC, National Research Council, but it's a reference document. It's a reference document that can be adopted by 10 provinces and the territories. Some provinces take the national code as is, the others adopt, update it, amend it, then adopt as a regulation, provincial regulation as it needed to be. Most territories usually follow, or the smaller provinces tend to adopt the national code. And the larger provinces, British Columbia, Alberta, Ontario, they tend to do their own amendments and augment the National Building Code to develop their own standards. So now the regulators are called different things, and the provinces have different sort of needs and the standards. Therefore, the oversight is also different. Then within the provinces itself, just before I go into the provinces side of it, or the regulation and regulatory oversight end of it, then there's a First Nation communities or unregulated areas where the oversight is a discretionary. How does that need to be? And now coming into the provinces side of it, there is a government, local government, and municipalities, counties, or regional districts. There's various names given to the authorities having jurisdiction, what they are, and then they adopt in most provinces, or in all provinces, I must say, the province adopts a regulation, then the municipalities or regional districts have to either adopt that or nothing. They can't usually have authority to develop their own building regulatory system, except in the exception of City of Vancouver. It has its own charter, and they develop their own building code. So now in the regulatory end of it, not of all of the provinces, province of Quebec does not regulate building. That's all done through the engineers and architects, basically the professionals in the engineering and architectural end of it. The rest of the provinces, specifically Ontario, Alberta, and British Columbia, there's a mixture of, and Saskatchewan and Manitoba as well. There's a mixture of public bodies, meaning either the municipality or the regional district or the county has authority, or in the other areas where there is a private oversight by private companies, as Jeff mentioned earlier, that he does provide oversight. So there is a sort of a mixture of it. The other part that probably will resonate with most of our audience is, so once you have a national building code, then you have a local provincial building code, then you come into the counties. Now you're looking at our old building regulations, whether that's a building bylaw, which generally dictates a building and construction. So the industry itself, one of the issues that come into it is that the industry itself has many different layers and functions in it. And those layers and functions are creating problems. And then once you go into within the provinces itself, in British Columbia and also in the other provinces, there is a First Nation treaty lands, and they are recognized as an independent government. So they again have their own authority to do what they wanted to do. Then there are other First Nation communities. Those are not a treaty lands, and they are governed by National Building Code. And in some instances, they may have the option to adopt the local provincial code. And then there are areas come in that's unregulated, where it's not in a jurisdiction of, it's within a regional district, but it's not regulated by a regional district. So that sort of this type of a sort of a mixture is probably similar what's happening in the US and in Australia and in New Zealand, especially in some of the sparsely populated areas where you may have a population of 3,000-4,000, but you still need to regulate the buildings, and that creates a bit of disjointed. So that's sort of the Canadian perspective on an oversight, how the regulatory system works. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Manjeet. And can I remind the panelists to please try and stick to our times? No disrespect there, Manjeet, but just be conscious that we do have a time frame. Ron, we have your perspective, please.
Certainly. I appreciate Manjeet giving me about 30 seconds. First of all, in the regulatory process, you have the governmental representatives who are the ones doing the inspections, who are hired by the government themselves. In the private sector, we make use of special inspectors as identified in the code in both Chapter 1 and more elaborated in Chapter 17 and in the Special Inspection Program Guide produced by ICC. Other agencies that can be used are engineering firms, quality assurance agencies, or can all be an aspect of taking a public-private initiative. And those public-private partnerships are invaluable from both a functional level as well as a political level. Nothing is appreciated more than bringing in the private sector in the government. Now, we use the term third party. There is a distinct difference between Chapter 17 and special inspection, which has grown immensely. It's not just structural, it's got fire safety, it's got soils, all kinds of things over the years. It's that it also, you can use the same techniques in helping with your manpower needs. I've set up special inspection programs in jurisdictions that had no electrical inspectors, so it was electrical and special inspections. Some, they needed plans examiners, contracted out plans examination. In others, they needed all kinds of administrative tasking. Indeed, even building officials. The entire process can be contracted out. You have to open up your mind and see what your public needs and what is the best way of serving them. With that, I think I've caught up on Majid, so I'm going to sign off. Jeff.
Thanks very much, Ron. And let's now turn to David and give us the UK perspective. Thank you, David. David, you're on mute, mate.
Yeah, in the UK, we've got a skills shortage and the skills required vary over time. We used to have a prescriptive system. It was straightforward, it's simple, you kept to the rules. We moved towards something which became more functional. This, we have greater risk assessment, professional judgment, and it was this time they introduced the private sector into building control. We then move a little bit further into performance. As we move on, we're looking at much greater alternative solution, justification, risk assessment, greater professional judgment, different skills applied. So therefore, we have the private sector, the public sector, and then we have what is the third party, competent person schemes to support the building control bodies in specialist areas. So that's the norm, that's how we operate, and the skills reflect on that. And if we move now onto the next slide, and it really is thinking about the future. In the UK, we have problems. We don't have enough people, but we've also had the disaster of Grenfell fire. Major investigation, a major review. Was it because we moved away from prescriptive, in other words, complying by rigid rules? Did we go too much towards performance? Did we rely too much on professional judgment? Should we limit it? So it's likely in the UK we're going to need new skills. We're going to need greater regulation. Our health and safety executive are going to take over a new role. This is going to build a building safety regulator. That's going to impact on the legislation. It's going to impact on people and the skills profile. So I think what I can say at this point, just so we can move through here, is that we are going to go through a whole period of restructuring and retraining. So in the UK, not only are shorter skills, but we've got to review and look at the skills we need to perform the safety function. So thank you.
Thank you very much, David. And now let's move down to Australia. And Jeremy, thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. We in Australia have multiple jurisdictions. We have both state and territory governments that regulate buildings and the building construction industry around the country. So the system of oversight does vary quite a bit. In some jurisdictions, consumers can seek approval from private practitioners who are regulated by a government registration authority. In others, consumers can seek approval from a local regulatory authority, having first obtained a certificate of compliance from a private practitioner. And in others still, consumers can choose to apply for approval from either a private practitioner or a public authority. The role of third parties also varies quite a lot in Australia, with some jurisdictions obliging acceptance of design work if it's prepared by registered practitioners, and others demanding that all design work is assessed. In some jurisdictions, a consumer can obtain a third-party certificate for design work, which may be accepted in some jurisdictions and must be accepted in others. So effectively, Australia is 8 different countries in one, and it can be quite difficult for the building industry, which is clearly global in nature, but being regulated locally, which is really not very effectual. And we often hear people in industry referring to the approval process as red tape, or to building officials as technocrats. And we understand that that's part of the sort of typical bullying tactics that are often employed to overcome compliance efforts for, that building surveyors present. And we've all heard apparently professional people say, no one's ever asked me for that before, or they don't do that way, do it that way where I'm from, and so on. And these are all issues that come about when you have a fragmented regulation system. It does create opportunities for people to exploit those sorts of loopholes. So there are clearly problems in Australia. We have also had a high-rise building fire, like most other jurisdictions around the world. And as a result of that and other world events, the building ministers from each jurisdiction got together and commissioned a report from Professor Peter Shergold, who's an expert in economics, and a prominent construction lawyer, Bronwyn Weir, to look at how to improve building confidence amongst the industry and community in Australia. That has 24 recommendations. There are 4 key themes: accountability, enforcement, information quality, and qualification skills maintenance. And although that report's been out for 3 years now, we actually still have yet to see major reforms coming out of that process. However, there's a lot of interest in each of the jurisdictions about how to actually respond. So as a result, I think we're likely to see at least 9 different outcomes from our 8 different jurisdictions, which is the usual sort of thing you ask. Anyway, and that follows on from numerous single jurisdiction reports which indicate that we do have a regulatory control issue in Australia in each jurisdictions in different ways. So every one of those reports has generated quite a bit of media interest, typically focusing on elements seen to be scathing of industry or industry regulation and regulatory effectiveness. And from an aspiring building surveyor's perspective, if you hear something said often enough, it becomes your truth. So the reputation of the industry is more and more appearing to match rhetoric from the prevalence of negative press, and that's fed by the continuous reporting of the need for reform, which comes from the lack of reform. So the bright spots are not highlighted and not as easily seen, and that has to change if the profession is to be respected and valued so that it can become attractive. And Australian buildings generally perform well, and oversight is largely effective. And it can be improved, and conversations like the one we're having today are part of that process. So back to you, Jeff.
Thank you very much, Jeremy. And one of the things you really touched on there was that public perception of the building and code official. So does that perception create a disincentive to enter this career? And it's a great lead into the next topic. And David, let's hear from you on the UK perception.
Thank you. It's interesting because, I listen to the discussions and it is about perceptions. Everyone talks about the negatives. People don't talk about the positives. It's something that we suffer with. There's always this issue about a government function being inferior to the private sector, corruption, the easy routes. But what we've got to look at is how we can drive the benefits of what we do. And that's really by what we do, how we do it, so we can get the positive responses, we can get the recommendations, we can make it work. That's really what we're looking at. And we're looking at individuals and organizations that become problem solvers. We can solve things, we're knowledgeable, we're technical. If I bring that back then to the UK, in the UK, the building inspector, public sector, they were expected to know everything, considered to know everything. They were the problem solver, high esteem, high respect. We then have an introduction of the private sector. There was competition, there was confusion, but the government had a fee structure. And there was a perception of the private sector being better. So we have to consider that. Then as we move forward, competition. The government abandoned their fee structure and we had a free market fee. If we know about competition, what happens? Fees are driven down. Lower fees, reduced service, lower visibility, less respect. Who are you? Covering a bigger geographical area. People don't sort of accept that you understand. You're not local to them, so it's a problem. With reduced fees, it's lower capacity. You know, how many inspections can you do? Whereas you may have done 8 or 9, you end up doing 2, 3, 4. You rely on photographic, virtual things. Public sector, people accept it's the government. Private sector, shop around for savings. And there's this concept that the private sector is more flexible. I use the word carefully. We all have to abide by the rules. But if you remember, I talked about professional judgments, different ways of doing things. And there was this view, there is this perception that the public sector, by the book, dogmatic, private sector, a little bit of elastic band, we can stretch it a little bit further. Maybe we can, maybe we can't. But what we need to do is to develop people that have the skills to deliver and to earn the respect from the industry. So we've got to change this perception. We've got to bring things together. Be seen as the problem solver and take safety forward in a big way. Thank you.
David, thank you very much for that. Now let's hear from Angela over in Western Australia. Thank you, Angela.
Thank you, Jeff. Good morning, good evening, and good afternoon to everybody who's joining us. In Western Australia, they transitioned from an old legislation to a new one with a 5-year transition to move from a trade professional into a industry university trained professional. And so generally people would have come to the tools. We had an unlimited set of people we could choose from because of the size of the construction industry. And that was really good. Then we became a profession and we lost our career path. And I don't think they noticed that it had actually occurred. And the career path is hard to find at the time. You still can't study building surveying in Western Australia. You have to do it correspondence if you would like to do university from another state. So we are now looking for people to fill into our industry, but they don't know what they're looking for because they may not have traditionally come from construction. They may be doing professional jobs that maybe suit building surveying, but don't traditionally look for it. So we need to go out, we need to promote, we need to go to schools, we need to do campaigns to let people know in Australia what we do, because I think everyone's just sitting and hoping that the government will do it for us. And they're not going to do it for us because we're battling, like most professions are, to compete against what ends up in the media. And it's generally ill-informed and very negative. We had the La Crosse fire here in Australia that brought building surveying to the attention of everybody within the public. While after the Grenfell fire had happened. And I don't think it caused too much damage because construction, they know who we are. No one else knows really what building surveyors are or what they do. They don't even know to ask for them. So in Australia, I don't believe that there was a negative impact because the public don't see us which is really unfortunate because the first person you should be engaging is a building surveyor, not an architect, not a builder, and not an engineer. But everybody knows those three words. So whether it's worldwide or certainly in Australia, we need to change that. And even the name in Australia is either certifier or building surveyor, depending on which legislation you're dealing with. So like everywhere else, we need to get everybody to understand what we do and the value we add to the construction industry. Thanks, Jeff.
Thank you, Angela. Let's now hear from Manjeet on the Canadian perspective.
Almost to the other side of the world. So what's the public perception of a building official? Well, public perception that what I have seen in the last 25, 30 years is that building official is a roadblock. Building official is a technocrat who says no to something that you want to, you're about to do, stop you from pouring concrete, stop you from occupying a building, stop you from using something or a dream that you want to build. That's a public perception that I see. You tell people that you're building official, they kind of move away from you about a couple of feet because they don't want to talk to you. That's a public perception. Then the other part that we face, I think in our industry, is most of us work for local government where there is a government oversight. Your councils or whatever that structure is. So you're reporting to an elected body, and that elected body doesn't have a whole lot of understanding of what our profession does and what we do. And I don't know, I'll steal this Ron saying that when we do, and one of the reasons that we are seeing this way, when we do our job right, nothing happens. As opposed to other professions, whether you're an architect, you design something, you're an engineer, you create something that's difficult. You're a firefighter, you save something, you structure or something. So many examples like that. And in the last few years, like when I was in the government side of it, I would go tell a business owner that he need to make certain upgrades, and then I'll be looked at it differently, sometimes chased out of the office. And if I would take a fire prevention officer with me, and he will tell the same thing plus 10 more things, and they'll thank him. And so that's a perception issue. So when we do our job right, nothing happens, and that's that perception and the changing this with elected officials and changing with the public, that public awareness need to happen. And the other part that comes in is that when we look into the developed world, this is one of the comments made by Dr. Kremgold. He was at one of our ICC's conferences, that why people in the Western buildings, whether that's in North America, in Western Europe, Australia, New Zealand, because our regulations are good. Second, there is an uninterested third party involved who has, other than the public safety, nothing else to gain from it. And that is a building official. But we don't talk about, celebrate it, and that's how the public perception is. Thank you.
Thank you, Manjeet. Now, let's hear from Bonnie, because I think Bonnie has a slightly different perspective on this. Thank you, Bonnie.
Yeah, I would say that generally in the United States, the building official community is seen positively by the public. Obviously, that'll be different from state to state and city to city, but that has certainly been my experience, that we have a pretty strong relationship with our contractors and architects. Usually what they are looking for from us is consistency in applying the code and doing everything as efficiently as possible so that we're not holding up their projects. But as Manjeet was saying, it's often not noticed by the public when we are doing our jobs. A safe building doesn't make the news, and the building official isn't going to get a lot of glory when everything's going right. So trying to get the word out to the public about what the role is for building officials is really crucial for getting people interested in careers in this profession. I know that there are a lot of things going on in the state chapters and local jurisdictions to try to promote Building Safety Month, for example, or to reach out to high school and technical colleges on their career days. But I think it's something that we need to keep exploring and keep pushing further to just maintain our positive perception and also educate on our role. Thanks.
Thank you, Bonnie. And an underlying thing that's come through that is education, I suppose, not only of the building officials, education of the public. So I think what the speakers have outlined there are some of the causes of the issues we have, and some of those may exist in your jurisdiction, some may not, depending where you are. What we're going to do now is turn to explore some of the solutions that have been successful. And the first thing we're going to look at is the education and training. And I'm going to turn to Ron now to lead off this discussion. Thanks, Ron.
There we go. Thank you. Well, it's often challenging to define a qualified candidate. You can look at their certifications and their education, and that's fairly black and white. Often that must be considered the bare minimum. They must be certified in the discipline that they're going to be hired in. They must have the degrees or the professional registrations as required by state and or federal law. But ultimately, there's got to be more. We need to look at the soft skills. Can they communicate? Is their knowledge something that can be verified? In other words, it's one thing to have a book knowledge. It's another to go ahead and see if they've actually employed that knowledge effectively. When I was interviewing people, often I would send them through a plan reading test. I would get people from college, even from engineering firms, that could not effectively read plans. And that meant, one, they were slower than they should have been in the job, and two, they just were not as adept. As far as soft skills and technical experience, if you cannot communicate, you're useless. I'm sorry, I don't care how smart you are or how much knowledge or how much certification you may have, you need to be able to communicate. And so we need to effectively have that or train that. Another technique for an ideal candidate, if I will, qualified candidate, is to take people from the special inspection ranks. These are people that often have verifiable experience in the soft skills, are knowledgeable, and in fact understand the obligations that a building department has as far as ethics and morality of what they do. All these different topics need to be incorporated in the education program. Our failing, if we have a failing, I believe, worldwide, is we do not. We emphasize getting technical training. It's not that it's easier, but it's something that we can quantify. And that is where we are going with everything. Did you get the math? Did you get the science? Did you pass this cert? And we ignore the portions that are often more critical to the effective regulatory process. Because if we can't get the information across to our customers, our citizens, if we can't educate contractors and builders, then we are failing in our job. Jeff?
Thanks very much, Ron. Let's then now turn to Manjeet, and we look at community colleges and technical schools. And are they able to produce qualified candidates?
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Ron. I mean, in a communication side of it, it's not what you say, how you say it. That's a standard phrase that's been employed. So now going back to the community colleges and technical schools. So in Canada, there's about roughly 10,000 building officials, except the province of Quebec, because they do not regulate buildings. So out of that, there is roughly speaking, with the population, building official, 3 building official per 10,000 people or something along those lines. Now, when you're looking at a community colleges and the universities or vocational colleges is trying to develop a program, one of the issues that they run into is out of a 10,000 now, what's the attrition? If you have going to replace 100, 200 people in a year throughout this great nation or Canada, a place like a Canada, all of it's about 6,000-7,000 kilometers between one and to the other. So the business case doesn't sort of make sense for them to create a program that can train building officials. I mean, they train building technologists, and that is just half of the battle. You may understand what the building science is, but how that is applied, how is the regulatory system working, what your reports mean, and what you need to do that regulatory. That part is a sort of a missing in a community college's point of view. So the British Columbia just embarked on a licensing regime for building officials. This came into effect about 23 days ago. This has been in a transition from the last 4 years. One of the biggest challenges that we faced noticed was that people have a technical knowledge, but they don't understand what exactly once they come into the door, they have a good communication skills that they can read plans, they can read the regulations. What else do they need to do? What else is a part of their job when they're coming into the municipality? So what we end up doing is creating just a hybrid system that's with the different organizations, the Municipal Insurance Association, the Province of BC Building Officials Association. It's called Building Official in Training. Basically, it's about a 2-week program with just to talk through what you will be doing once you come in and sit in that seat, just to give you a basic understanding. And there has been quite a bit of an uptake on that. And that uptake is more, even some of the seasoned building officials, they're interested and they want to see, okay, what am I supposed to do when I do, what's the classic case for me to doing it? So that's a bit of a success story from that point of view. We are seeing some great uptake on it. Again, that goes back to our own association doing some initiatives to fill this technical skills gap that we face. Thank you.
Thank you, Manjeet. Now let's turn to David to sort of discuss about vocational training versus academic, sort of pure academic training. Thank you, David.
So thank you. Within the UK, we have a system. We had a system where we were very much focused on the trade, the hands-on, the basic skills. If you had those and a bit of management, you could become a building inspector. As our system changed, functional, performance-based, the level of education required got higher and higher and higher. So we went towards degrees, industrial years, and then all of a sudden, we were falling short. People coming out with degrees without the skills to actually apply them to earn fees and do the job for real. So then we've gone back looking at vocational qualifications, but with Grenfell, everything is up in the air. And now the theme is really, what are the appropriate qualifications for the role? So we need to look very closely at the balance between the academic and the vocational skills to ensure that whoever is out there doing the work are doing it well, and in effect, they are fit for purpose. This means we've now got to look at the academic role. We've got to look at not only compliance with codes and regulations, but look at the roles and responsibilities and take ownership of what people have got to do, what they've got to deliver. And we've got to encourage with the academic programs a return to this placement year within industry. So people with a degree come out with at least a year's experience so they can apply those skills. On the vocational side, the industry has got to look much broader than this. They've got to look at sponsored programs, part-time degree programs, an extension of the vocational qualifications, hands-on, apprenticeships. So they've got to refocus again to try and address the skills and the shortfall. Then you've got likes of the local authorities. they're struggling. They need, and they're applying their own rules. They're developing their own programs to actually bring forward and get people qualified. If you look at the very big picture, we went from vocational, hands-on skills through to very high-level academic skills because of the need for professional judgment, research, new materials, new ways in which we do things. We have a disaster, we've got to go back, we've got to rethink. And somewhere in here, we've got to provide a skills balance so that people can progress and actually deliver what we're looking for, and that is safety within the built environment. So we've got to look very closely at the direction and get that balance right, and then use those skills appropriately within the organizations, within the building control bodies, the right person for the right job at the right level, and obviously reward them accordingly. So I think we've got to look closely. Okay, thank you.
David, sorry, you just dropped out that last, your last comment then, you just sort of dropped out slightly.
We're really just focusing again on getting the balance right and then applying that efficiently for the safety of buildings. Thank you.
Great, thanks very much, David. Okay, so let's looking at the education and training. How do we sort of redefine this professionalism? How do we sort of lift the bar around this? Is sort of following on from the perception, I suppose, but how do we lift that bar? And I'm now going to turn to Jeremy to look at some of the what's happening in Australia.
Thanks very much, Jeff. It's an interesting development that's occurring, and it really does pick up on the point that David was making about the need for highly skilled people. So what's happening at the moment is all Australian governments have established a professional standards council, which consists of members of the councils of each other jurisdiction. So you end up with effectively a single council that is in common right throughout every jurisdiction in Australia. Now, that body and its agency work to improve professional standards and protect consumers of professional services across Australia. And it oversees schemes operated by a range of bodies for various professions. So we have lawyers, land surveyors, property valuers, and a range of others. It regulates professional and occupational associations to facilitate and promote consumer protection through improvement in professional standards by professional standards schemes, which are regulated by approved associations. So the Australian Institute of Building Surveyors is an occupational association which has proposed the establishment of such a scheme for building surveyors. And it's for building surveyors who are practicing in the regulation of the building industry, either in private or public settings. So if accepted, this will mark building surveying as a formal profession in Australia, defining a qualification pathway from further or higher education starting points and from allied professions or trades backgrounds, as well as enabling a legislated limitation of liability for scheme participants, which is an incredibly important thing in this environment. So the Australian Institute of Building Surveyors will be required to administer entry into the scheme via clearly defined qualification pathways, a mandatory continuing professional development program, standards of professional conduct via enforcement of a code of conduct, a consumer complaints mechanism, and ensure appropriate professional standards of consumer protection are maintained via an audit program capable of actually affecting behavioural change and excluding participants from practitioners from participation in the industry where they're not able to demonstrate they're fit to practice. So together, each of these steps will ensure that identification as a participating member will have real value. It will be a badge consumers, industry and regulators can recognise and trust. So regulators will preference participation in a professional standards scheme when identifying persons who are eligible to practice within a jurisdiction. In many cases, that will mean that the standard accepted will be higher than is currently accepted, particularly around technical auditing of practitioner decisions, which is not done well by any Australian jurisdiction. Technical auditing of private practitioners is essential as an element of practitioner integrity. And technical auditing of public officials is also essential in respect of its anti-corruption measures. Together, competent auditing is integral to public perception of the profession and the industry. And most Australian regulators perform administrative auditing only, with very few venturing into technical auditing, and often using a single technical auditor with limited experience, particularly of competent application of a performance-based building code. So there's no other construction industry professional or trade that's subject to anything near the level of scrutiny that building surveyors bear, which makes sense. Non-building surveying participants in industry don't regulate the industry. We do. So building surveyors should expect to demonstrate a higher standard of integrity. It's our expectation and hope that our work to establish a professional standard scheme will put the profession on a pedestal, and that'll create a point of difference that's likely to attract the right kind of person. Thanks, Jeff.
Thank you, Jeremy. And look, I'm seeing a few questions coming through on the Q&A. Now, some of those questions are actually going to be answered as we move through, but so please keep the questions coming, and so we can facilitate some discussion when we're finished. I'm now going to turn to Maddie, and she's going to have or discuss with us how the ICC's training and certification programs are assisting in helping that build the skills and demonstrate those competencies. Thank you, Maddie.
Thanks, Jeff. So a couple of things I want to touch on. The topic that we just covered on education, it kind of leads nicely into our technical training program. And I am having some Wi-Fi issues, so if I break up, I apologize. The technical training program is part of the Safety 2.0 umbrella of programs, and it targets high schools and community colleges generally. So that is a nice foot in the door for students who are interested in the building safety field to get an initial credential before they actually get their certification. So the topic of certification in the United States obviously varies a lot. Job requirements vary a lot from state to state and can even vary jurisdiction to jurisdiction. So the nice thing about ICC certification is that it is a nationally recognized certification. People in the building industry generally know the weight that an ICC certification holds. And so that brings a lot of value to, and is the reason why a lot of our members, most of our members are certified members. So it is also part of how people can assess how qualified a candidate is when they apply for a job in a building department. A lot of states take that certification and then combine it with other things, like they require internships or certain number of years of apprenticeship before you actually receive a state's certification or accreditation. So there's a lot of different ways that is accomplished in the United States, but a common thread is usually an ICC certification. Thanks, Jeff.
Thank you, Maddie. I'm now going to turn to Ron, who's going to look at how we integrate third-party experience into the process. Thanks, Ron.
Thank you, Jeff. I'm going to approach this a slightly different. First, I'll touch on it. One of the advantages of having a special inspection program in the industry, which is a private or third-party process, is it can become a feeder program to building departments. These are inspectors who are certified, perhaps not in the discipline you are specifically looking for, but they are typically either ICC, AWS, Portland Concrete, whatever it is, certified in a technical discipline, have learned certain skills such as documentation, can be observed in the field. Hopefully your inspectors have observed their customer service skills, and you can go out there and interview contractors who have dealt with them. So it becomes a very valuable resource out there. From a general point of view, the third party is a process that's a panacea. If you can't do something, then don't disrespect your public and don't fail in your mission of a safe site built environment, and utilize third party on a contract basis. But as I mentioned, it's a great feeder program for hiring your own inspectors. I've done it many, many times. As far as selecting and auditing third-party providers, it's a question sent to me. It is very much similar to that which is done for your own people. It puzzles me when a building department will aggressively audit the activities of third-party inspectors, and the reason is that they have no control. They're auditing them so rigorously because they are not employed by the building department. So I agree with the auditing process, but they don't audit their own people. Every one of my inspectors was subject to a quality assurance program. Every one of my plans examiners had a quality assurance program. And we had internally and externally people look at them, reviewing their plans that they had done, reviewing the inspections, and giving them a, if you will, a report card. And it was multi-level. First of all, we had merely where inspectors would just swap their work out and do an informal critique. It was often very interesting and led to a new educational programs. Second, we had supervisors going out there and looking at their work and giving them, if you will, again, a report card. Occasionally I would go out there, but then that was useless because I didn't know what I was looking at. But it helped. I got out there. Third or fourth, if you will, we looked at all the paperwork that was being done. Often this could be done in the office. And our supervisors watched not only the technical aspects, but remember we talked about the soft skills briefly. They watched how people dealt with the contractors, dealt with their peers, in this case, third-party inspectors. And in that way, they had a better appreciation of the totality of how our professionals were regulating our industry and our public. And they corrected them. And their raises or disciplines or their lack thereof of raises was predicated on how well they did. You've got to put the carrot and the stick together. I don't mean you beat them with a stick, but you have to get them together and let them do it. I appreciate what David had said before about qualifications. We need, and Jeremy also mentioning qualifications. But it is not enough to have the qualifications if you do not look at how they are using those qualifications, whether they are independent organizations doing plan review or inspection, or whether it is your own people doing plan review or inspection. And I don't want to be negligent in not mentioning our counter staff. These are the people who see the public firsthand. And if you are going to build a professional organization, they have got to be up to stuff. They've got to be ready to go out there and do something to show that your department, your organization has their interests at heart and is not just, as someone said, oafish in the question and answers, that they're not bullying people, that we are trying to together solve their problems. And we are here to make it, and I hate when people say, I don't care how much it costs to fix it, to make it a cost-effective, safe environment. Cost-effective. And with that, I'll get off my short soapbox. Go ahead, Jeff.
Thanks very much, Ron. And look, again, we're coming back to these perceptions in all these things, and it's a big hurdle we have to get over. But part of, once we attract people into the system, how do we mentor them? What are the pathways? How do we expand on the pathways that are available to people? I'm going to now turn to Manjeet to give us a perspective on why he feels mentorship is so important in this role. Thank you, Manjeet.
Thank you, Jeff. So Ron talked about auditing, and auditing to me is walking behind someone. So something is already done. Now you're checking whether it's done right or not. And the way I look at it, mentorship is walking in front of someone, showing someone how to do it. And I'll touch base a little bit on our mentorship. So I'll tell you a little story, but maybe 5 seconds. If you would have asked me in December of 1987, what's a 2x4? I would have said 8, because I have a degree in math and never saw 2x4 before in my life. So, and here I am now talking about a building code of regulations and a wood frame construction and so on and so forth. So the mentorship comes in. You have a tradespeople coming in. They may have taken a code course. You have a technical institute people coming. They may have gone through with basic scratching the surface understanding of the technical requirement, but they haven't really got into it. So then mentorship comes in, and is that some seasoned building officials, code officials, building surveyors, different names that we have given them is okay. Once you get it into these, what are you supposed to look? What your report supposed to look like? And how you develop the mentorship program is in New Zealand has probably one of the good ones that I've seen so far, and there's a few others around, and ICC I believe has one as well. So mentorship is really allowing individuals to teach others without incurring a liability, because that's a liability for most building departments or private organizations is an issue. So and the mentorship could happen within your own jurisdiction. You hire a new hire, or even outside of your own jurisdiction, if there is an arrangement can be made. So to me, like when I came in, and as like why it's important is that if I hadn't been walked on a 2x4s, I wouldn't have understand what they were. Thank you.
Thank you, Manjeet. Now, I'm going to ask for Bonnie and Ron to do a paired arrangement here and talk about personal reflection from a mentee and mentor perspective. And I'm not sure which one of you is going to lead off on this, probably Ron as the mentor.
Okay. Well, mentoring is one of the oldest forms of communicating knowledge and influence sharing. Most of what you learn in your life is informal, not just the education. As a matter of fact, the old saying in engineering firms and architecture firms is, once you get your degree, we hire you, then we will train you, because you didn't learn how to do the job in college. So learning is not done by necessarily reading or taking classes, but learning on the job and from others. So mentoring is a great tool for navigating an organizational culture. Usually you use a mentor within your organization, can be outside, for problem solving, for advancing employees' careers, increasing productivity while decreasing stress. It's a way of keeping people. When you are a mentor, it's very rewarding for you individually. It should be also rewarding to the protege or mentee. It is a technique. When you take that amount of effort to care about your employees and about your people out there doing the work, it is reflected throughout the industry. People in the outside industry say, look at what they're doing for their people. They're not only helping them, they're helping us. And you know, I'd like to work for an organization that takes that much effort in caring for their people. Being a mentor is not just a one-time activity. A mentor and a mentee need to work together on a program. You're going to look at articles, books, techniques. You're going to communicate with other people, especially as a mentor, to bring in and help educate. Clearly, I mentored a number of women in construction. However, I needed to bring in experienced women in construction to add that flavor and that concept, that need to show directly the challenge that we're experiencing and the victories that they received. So you have to go outside your little shell. I don't want to overdo it, because I think the most important part of a mentoring program is really the mentee. So Bonnie, if you will.
Yes, I definitely wouldn't be where I am in my career if it wasn't for strong mentors. I had a less traditional path into being a plans examiner and building inspector. I just happened to take a entry-level job in our municipal government right out of college. But pretty soon I got to know our building inspectors, our plans examiners, and chief building official, and was interested in joining the department. And all of those individuals above me really paved the way by taking me out on the job site, you know, showing me what different things looked like, both on the plans and in the field, pointing me in the direction of what courses I should take, what certifications I would need in order to advance into different roles. And I'm just so grateful that people were willing to, maybe take a risk on someone who didn't have the same level of technical training, but was willing to learn. And I think that, mentoring, seeking out people who are enthusiastic to get into the field, and then providing them with the tools and certifications and all of that, it just works together to build a program that will feed the next generation of code officials.
Great, thanks very much, Ron and Bonnie for that. I'm now going to turn to Maddie, who's going to sort of start introducing some of the other career paths and how we can actually attract more people into the professions.
Thanks, Jeff. So we're just going to pivot a little bit to a program that ICC has started for specific to veterans and military families. When veterans are trying to transition back into civilian life, there are a lot of organizations that actually connect them to specific career paths that might be relevant, or might use a lot of the skills that they developed over their time and experiences in the military. So we have actually partnered with an organization, it's called Vets to PM. So we've partnered with them, and they have referred a lot of people to our program. And how our program works is we kind of combine a little bit of mentorship and career path. So part of the program, we recommend they apply, or they submit their information to become a mentor or become a mentee. So obviously in this situation, they would be the mentee. So we try to pair them up with somebody who is in their area in the country, in the US, and that we've had a lot of success stories with that. It kind of combines what Ron and Bonnie were talking about with ride-alongs, and they can actually get experience on the job site before they proceed with getting certified and moving forward into the building safety profession. Also, one thing I've learned with that program is the need for a clear path, because when somebody is coming in new to the industry, you have to clearly lay out everything that's needed for them to actually get a job in the industry. So we actually have a section on the Safety 2.0 website where it lays out step by step based on the certification you're wanting to obtain. It lays it out for you very clearly on how to reach that point. I think Bonnie spoke to it, but we also have a lot of veterans that participate in our board shadow program, and some of our chapters have veteran-specific programs as well. Another thing that's beneficial in the U.S. is that each branch of the military has a program that covers the cost of some education and usually the certification exam. So it's nice that it kind of prevents veterans from spending a lot out of pocket. And I think that the military program has been the best example of kind of summarizing mentoring and career path necessity as you get into the field.
Thanks very much, Maddie. I'm now going to, excuse me, turn to Jeremy, and just for a little quick insight on sort of an untapped resource that we do have out there. Thanks, Jeremy.
Yeah, no problem, Jeff. Look, there are a range of programs that are aimed at bringing construction industry workers in particular across into the building surveying field. And those programs are actually quite hard to establish because of the disparity in the remuneration that those construction industry workers are typically used to receiving. Because obviously once they transition into a new profession, they're at the beginning, and the bottom rungs of the pay scales are often applicable. So that does create some fairly big obstacles right from the get-go. But the other issues that we have with people who are perhaps unable to continue in their construction career because of injuries and the like is that it is also going to potentially be a limitation on their ability to work in the building surveying field as well. So after a lifetime of construction industry work, you know, their impaired capacities can limit the inspections they can undertake. But so what that means is you've got to develop a program that will identify those physical and knowledge limitations of individuals and then tailor skills acquisition to build on that capability that's already there. And you need to focus on the limitations of vocational or trades background education that's often typical of these sorts of people. So one size doesn't fit all. Demand in Australia is mixed and it's often insufficient to justify the comparatively large cost of developing programs. And so, and the other comment I'd like to make about this pathway too is that as site safety improves, so too does the risk of injury that's going to limit someone's career in the construction industry. So in fact, what we're seeing more and more now is that construction industry workers are retiring at retirement age instead of retiring early. And then obviously looking to spend more time with the grandkids or in their favourite recreation spot instead of moving into building surveying. So it's an opportunity, but it's not necessarily the panacea that we're looking for.
Great, thanks Jeremy for that insight, and thanks to everyone on that side of things. The next thing we're going to look at, and it's been reflected a little bit in what we've said, and I see there's a couple of questions in relation to this as well, about diversity in our workforce. How are we being inclusive enough? How do we overcome this? And I'm going to now turn to Angela to give a perspective, or from her perspective, on this topic of diversity.
Thank you, Jeff. You cannot deny that historically, the majority of people who worked in construction were men. This was not deliberate, but the type of work that was available, and it's mostly continued that way. When I commenced in the construction industry, I was told it was a man's world. And what became apparent to me was that people lived to go to work. This included very long days, weekends, evenings, and they didn't do much else. There was nothing else to discuss during shift, just work and maybe sport. To increase diversity, we need to break the stereotype of what a person working within construction industry looks like. Today, young people, whether male, female, or non-binary, they don't identify themselves by their job. People are looking to maintain a work-life balance, not just die at their desks and miss out on life with their families and their friends. To get more people into the profession, we need it to be more attractive, not just salary and working conditions, but to a person's lifestyle and also assist with their mental well-being. In Victoria, the Victorian government has put $6.3 million into a women's building surveying program to bring 40 women into the profession with local governments. The Women's Building Surveying Program was established to improve the gender balance in the construction industry, to fill skills shortage, and to drive construction stimulus projects as part of the state's economic recovery. Thank you, Jeff.
Thanks, Angela. And I'm going to now turn to David and look at his perspective from the UK. Thank you, David.
Thank you. It's interesting because it's a rolling program. In the UK, we've had a lot of work to do. Construction, a dirty business, a risky business, dangerous business. And as Angela said, it was the man's world. You know, that was it in a nutshell. We've been trying to address these. We're still working on it. What is important is that construction is a diverse industry. We need to look at that. And the key areas that we're looking at the moment are the age profiling. Okay, what do we do? When do we do it? When do we start? When do we finish? And how we can actually capture the experience and the expertise. Equality. Everyone has the need for change, challenge, and opportunity. We need to provide that. It's interesting in the UK, we're getting more and more managers that are women. We're getting more and more people who have different levels of mobility moving within the industry because the skills can be applied at different times. And the ability, you know, because it is so diverse, people can perform at all differing levels within the industry. So the scope is there, the opportunity is there. In the UK, it's interesting because listening to everyone speak today, we've covered a very broad area, but we have just in the UK published, it's by our Construction Leadership Council, they've just published their document, Industry Skills Plan. This is for 21 to 25. And they have got 4 key areas they're looking at. One is the whole concept of the career, great. Standards and qualifications, brilliant. They're then looking at training, education and development, superb. But they are looking at the culture and the working environment. So within the UK, we've got the documentation there now. It's a case of getting the industry to bite into it, develop it, and take it forward. I'm hoping that by the time we get to 2025, you know, we've cracked a lot of the problems. So diversity in construction, diversity is what we need in terms of people and the opportunity to work within that industry. Thank you.
Thank you, David. I'm now going to turn to Bonnie and get her perspective on this topic. Thank you, Bonnie.
Well, I am the only woman out of 8 full-time employees at the City of Aspen Building Department. I've pretty much been the only female since I started. But I really haven't experienced that much pushback as a woman coming in. I think a lot of that has to do with, again, having strong mentors, strong supervisors who had my backs, so to speak, if someone were to challenge me on an inspection or on a review. Just creating that culture that you are going to be there for your employees goes a long way. I think also what Angela spoke to about creating a work culture that supports people who have families, and while we don't have other women, we do have some other young fathers who have been able to take time off to be with their kids. So I think that at least in our department, that perception is changing, that you can have a building career and still have a work-life balance. I know when I started going to code official meetings about 10 years ago and different trainings, I would look around the room and maybe see 3 women out of 50 people, maybe be one of the only people in the room under age 40. But I think every year that's changing. And nowadays when I go to meetings, I might see a quarter of the room is women and, you know, more and more young faces, which is encouraging and exciting for me. I am part of the Emerging Leaders Membership Council, which the ICC has started to encourage young leaders coming into the profession, give them a chance to have their voice heard within the larger code council. And it's been just a wonderful experience. Within our membership, we have just a ton of diversity across all demographics, men and women, different ages, different backgrounds, people who came in to the profession through more traditional paths, maybe from engineering school, architecture school, people who came in through the trades, also some veterans, as Maddie was speaking to. And, you know, I'm hopeful that maybe in 10 years, when we do more studies on the building profession, we'll see that there's a lot of more people coming in and new blood, so to speak. I think now we have some time for questions.
Great. Thanks very much, Bonnie, and thank you to the panel members for all that. Now, I've seen a couple of questions, or quite a few questions coming through in relation to soft skills. We could probably address some of those now, but we've got a full webinar series planned for September on soft skills development. So a lot of that will be covered in that upcoming webinar. I see one question here. The number one reason we receive from individuals leaving industry is the liability is too great for the reward. Inspectors are left vulnerable to lawsuits, and there's even criminal charges for missing a code violation. How do we change that atmosphere? Now, I know Jeremy sort of addressed that slightly with the professional standards scheme that's being looked at for adoption here through the profession in Australia. Jeremy, I wonder if you'd like to just make a little further comment on that specific question.
Yeah, look, no problem, Jeff. Thank you. In the process of actually making an application to the Professional Standards Council about operating a scheme, we had to collect a whole lot of information, data on insurance claims throughout Australia. And that data needed to cover a 10-year period so that we could demonstrate the reasonableness of the proposed liability caps that would apply to scheme members. Now, the caps that we're proposing are, I guess, two-stage caps. So if you're working on buildings that are low-rise, you would have a $1 million cap on liability. And if you're working on anything that's greater than 3 stories and above, you would have a cap of liability of $2 million. Now, that doesn't sound very high when you look at the value of buildings that people would be assessing and inspecting and the like in their roles. However, when we looked at the data, the large claims that were attributed to building surveyors were actually really rare. They were statistical outliers. And in fact, the responsibility of a building surveyor amongst the responsibility of all of the other players in the process of developing the building was actually quite small. So we were able to demonstrate that in fact the risk is quite low, and therefore the cap is reasonable. And particularly when you have a very effective auditing scheme to make sure that people are behaving professionally at all times, that really does tend to mitigate that risk even further. So we're quite confident that those caps will be accepted, and that's in fact what we'll be looking for as we go forward. So that's, I think, going to be very, very helpful for people who are thinking about coming into the industry. They'll understand that there is in fact a mechanism there that actually does manage that risk for them, and that by participating in the scheme that they will be helped to make sure that they are properly managing that risk. So it's a two-way process. It's not all about the stick, as Ron referenced it. There's a bit of carrot and a bit of mentoring that happens there through that auditing process as well. So it's hopefully going to be quite influential in changing the perception of the profession throughout Australia.
Thanks very much, Jeremy. David, you actually raised this in part of your introduction, certainly with the Grenfell tragedy and what that's doing. I wonder if you would like to contribute to that discussion.
Yes, I would. We are seeing insurance premiums rising significantly. And one of the problems with insurance is the extra bit you have to pay. You know, the 25,000s, the 30,000s. When you try and compare that with fee income, it's a very difficult situation. If you remember right at the beginning when I talked about the UK legislation, we used to have prescriptive rules. You built it by the rules, that was it, full stop. As we went to more and more professional judgment, the risk increases. So we've got problems now balancing up this risk element to the liability, and we've got problems in trying to get over this whole factor: roles, responsibility, liability, and ownership. It's not going to go away. So we're really waiting for the outcome from the discussions and investigations linked to, you know, the disaster that happened. But we're also having decisions that were made years ago, you know, using information technology at that time, that are being challenged. So there are some issues there that it's going to take us a while to adjust and actually look at.
Thanks very much. Did any one of the other panel members have a quick comment or want to? No, shaking of heads. Thank you. The next question, God, we're getting thousands of them now. Question here, and it comes back to sort of almost our diversity question. From my point of view, not too many incentives for getting more certifications or education for inspectors. On another note, I've been told I look too young to be an inspector. I'm 29. I think that society itself has an image of older gentlemen doing inspections, which many of us are. I don't often meet too many young trade contractors or apprentices. Any ideas on how we change this? I might go back to our diversity speakers on this one. And Angela, do you want to contribute to or throw something out on that one?
What we need to do as industries is really get the people who run companies involved. And it's also the way we express ourselves and how we speak to people. I mean, I love doing inspections and they think I'm the secretary. I mean, just gives me hours of entertainment that they'll spend their time doing man talk with the men and leave me alone. And I personally am not overly bothered by it because I do understand with a lot of people, the way they interact with you is their life experiences. I'm generally more mortified when I get it from a younger person and I think they should know better. And to me, we just need to be professional in what we do, and we just can't behave in a manner, we don't behave in a manner that is what we don't like the other people in the way they behave. So I think you will find that it's inevitable from when I started, as said previously by someone else, you'd go into an event and you were one girl in front of 300 men and it was like being at an RSL club. That is very different now. There is a lot of young, dynamic, lots of people that look very different to each other, speak very differently, behave very differently, dress very differently, and that is really good. Those stereotypes are going to break down. In 5 or 10 years, you'd find it quite remarkable that you're just not going to see them. And I think we just would like to take that time to remember now at the birth of a changing profession to be able to see that change and think at least we added to the experience. Thanks, Jeff.
Thank you, Angela. Look, we've only got a very short time left on the series. Did anyone else want to make a comment on that, on the last point we're talking about changing this attitude, getting the younger people in?
I would make the comment that you said about soft skills. Part of the soft skills is about presentation, it's about confidence, and it's about being able to solve problems. And from solving problems, it's respect that comes from it. And I think a lot of it is trying to develop confidence, not only on the technical, but confidence on the soft skill side, so people can present, they can solve problems and be accepted in that way.
Jeff, Ron, we talked about mentoring briefly, but one of the aspects is to mentor outside your profession. In other words, to meet with union people, tradespeople, students, to go out as an outreach process and sit down and discuss the rewarding aspects of a governmental regulatory position and how it means as a legacy. I used to emphasize this with my own staff. Everything out there built, we are part of safeguarding that and making sure it's sustainable for our society. So when you can imbue that kind of passion to other people, they are more apt to see the regulatory role as a viable option. Thank you.
Great, and thank you, Ron. That's really a nice little summary to finish up on. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like you to thank Angela, who's had to get up really early to do this, and David, who's had to stay up real late to do this, and our other speakers, Bonnie, Jeremy, Maddie, Manjeet, and Ron. A replay of this webinar is going to be available on in the Global Media Centre that can be accessed by the Global Membership Council page on the ICC. We've got a whole lot of other these series coming up over the year run by the Global Membership Council. June, we're going to look at conformity assessment. September, the soft skills, as I mentioned before. And December, existing and emerging leaders. Thank you all for your attendance today, this evening, this morning, wherever you are. And we look forward to your participation in our upcoming series. Please forward any other questions you may have to us, to Judy at jzagreski@iccsafe.org, and we will probably publish a summary of this to go with the webinar. So on that note, and right on time, thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff.
Thanks.